The night I heard my son on the phone, I was standing in the hallway of my own house, holding a coffee mug I didn't remember pouring. It had been like that for 5 months, moving room to room with no memory of why I'd started, not because anything was wrong with my mind, because Lucille was gone, and without her to give every room a reason, they all felt the same, empty. My son, Kirk, and his wife, Dina, had been at the house since sundown. Kirk had stepped out to the back patio to take a call. The kitchen window was cracked 2 inches, just enough to let in the October air, just enough to let his voice in. "It's working," he said. He was speaking low, the careful voice he used when he thought nobody was listening. "He's been a wreck since Mom. Barely eating. Standing in rooms doing nothing. The footage from this week alone is good, Dina. The cameras are getting everything we need. Dr. Hartwell says if we can show consistent confusion, we can petition the court for full guardianship by the end of next month. He needs the filing submitted before the deadline or the whole acquisition timeline slips." I stopped breathing. The coffee mug in my hand weighed 1,000 pounds. I stood in the hallway, where Lucille and I had hung 30 years of Christmas cards, where I had watched my son take his first steps on unsteady legs, and I listened to him tell his wife that he had put cameras in my house, and was planning to have a judge declare me unfit to manage my own life. Cameras, guardianship petition, acquisition timeline, Dr. Hartwell. "Get me everything by Friday," he said. "Hartwell needs confirmation before the deadline." He came back inside 2 minutes later, smelling of cold air and rehearsed concern. I was sitting in the armchair by the time he found me, coffee mug on my knee, staring at the wall with the particular absence that had become my natural expression since Lucille died. "You okay, Dad?" he asked. I looked at my son, 40 years old, handsome in the way his mother had always been proud of, standing in the doorway of the house where he had grown up. "Just tired," I said. I let him believe it. "My name is Arlo Mead. I am 67 years old. For 35 years I ran a small carpentry and construction business. Just me and whatever crew I could hold together through good seasons and bad ones. I built things from the ground up, poured foundations and framed walls and hung doors until my hands were rough enough to strike a match on, and my back announced itself every morning in a way I had come to recognize as honest. Lucille kept the books until we could afford someone else to. She raised Kirk while I was on job sites. She planted hydrangea beds along the front fence every April, on her knees in the dirt, talking to the plants like old friends, until she was too sick to kneel. Then she sat on the porch swing and directed me where to dig while she watched. She had opinions about every hole. She died 5 months before that night. Ovarian cancer. We had 2 years from diagnosis to the last morning, and I would give back every comfortable year I had before that diagnosis to live those 2 years again. After she was gone, the house felt like a structure that had lost its load-bearing wall, still standing, but wrong. Kirk and Dina started coming around more, every week, sometimes twice, bringing food I hadn't asked for, staying past comfortable, asking questions that felt less like concern and more like inventory. "How are you sleeping? Are you keeping up with your medications? Do you remember if you called the electric company?" I thought it was grief, his grief, working itself out the only way he knew how. He had always needed to be useful when he was scared. I was wrong about that. The morning after I heard him on that patio, I drove out to see Del. Del Pruitt had been my electrical subcontractor for 22 years before he retired. 70 years old now, living on a half-acre outside town, with a workshop so full of wires, tools, and stripped equipment, it looked like a hardware store had gotten into an argument with itself and lost. Del was the kind of man who could look at any system, electrical, mechanical, digital, and understand it the way a doctor reads an X-ray, calmly and without drama. I told him everything I had heard, all of it, word for word. He didn't say I was sure he didn't mean it that way. He didn't say maybe you misunderstood. He leaned back in his chair, rubbed his jaw once, and said, "You want me to come sweep the house?" We drove back in 2 cars. Del went through every room quietly, the same way he had rewired 100 old buildings, patient, methodical, working from the outside in. It took him 45 minutes. He found 4 cameras. One in the kitchen, wedged into the bracket behind Lucille's decorative plate above the refrigerator. A plate she had bought at a craft fair in 2009, The one with the blue morning glories that she said looked like our yard in June. One in the living room, built into the base of a table lamp Kirk had brought over 3 weeks ago. Wrapped in tissue paper, said it was a housewarming gift for the new arrangement of the furniture. One in the hallway outside my bedroom door, disguised as a smoke detector, a convincing one, with a lens the diameter of a pencil eraser hidden inside the housing. And one in the coat closet in the front entry, mounted in the corner behind the hanging jackets, angled toward the door. Dell laid them all on the coffee table in a row. 4 cameras, all wireless, all motion activated, all recording every time I walked into a room and stood there not knowing why I was standing there, grief making the simplest moments look, to anyone watching, like confusion. Dell sat across from me. He waited. "You want them out," he finally said. "Not yet," I said. Because I had spent my whole career in construction, and the first thing construction teaches you is this: you do not remove the structure until you understand what it is holding up. Dell's nephew, Perry, a young real estate attorney, who had apparently inherited every bit of the Pruitt family's talent for reading complicated systems and none of their distaste for paperwork, spent that afternoon pulling public records. What he found dismantled the floor I'd been standing on. The city council had passed a rezoning measure 6 weeks earlier. The entire block surrounding my street, 11 properties plus mine, had been reclassified from residential to medical use commercial. A hospital group out of Nashville had been quietly acquiring every parcel in the corridor for the past 8 months. All off-market transactions, all cash, all handled through a development intermediary, so that the sellers never quite knew what they were selling into. By Perry's count, every parcel on the block had been purchased. Except mine. My lot, 1.8 acres on the east side of the block, the same land I had paid off the mortgage on 11 years ago and celebrated with a single glass of good bourbon, sat at the center of the proposed anchor building footprint. Without my 2 acres, the hospital group could not build their main structure. The entire $40 million campus required my land as its cornerstone. Without it, nothing could break ground. The whole project stalled. I called Tom, the realtor who had sold Lucille and me this property in 1987. I asked him what my house was worth. He said the structure itself, maybe $80,000. Structures don't hold value much in a rezoned medical corridor because developers tear them down. The land, though. He went quiet for a moment. Then he said carefully, "Arlo, a comparable lot 4 parcels west of you sold 3 months ago for $4.4 million, and that one was smaller." He let me sit with the arithmetic. My land was not worth the $600,000 I had assumed for 35 years of ownership. It was worth somewhere between $7 and $9 million. And the development company coordinating all those acquisitions, the name on the rezoning application Perry pulled, the name on the parcels already signed over, was Hartwell Development Group. The same name my son had said on the phone. The same Dr. Hartwell who needed the guardianship petition, filed before his acquisition timeline slipped. If Kirk gained legal guardianship over my finances and property, which a court could grant if he presented convincing evidence that I was no longer competent to manage my own affairs, he would have the legal authority to sell my land without my signature or my consent, and Hartwell Development had promised him a finder's fee in exchange. I sat at Perry's kitchen table for a long time after he finished talking, long enough that he refilled my water glass twice without being asked. Then I called Dell. Dell lent me a prepaid phone, a battered thing he kept for reasons he had never fully explained, and I had never pushed on. I drove home. I sat in the kitchen with that phone on the table in front of me, and I thought about Lucille and about what she would have said. She would have said, "Don't get loud. Loud is for people who don't know what they're doing." I called Kirk. I let my voice be what it had been in the worst weeks, slower, softer, a little lost around the edges. "I had a moment today," I said. "A bad one. I was standing in the kitchen for what must have been 20 minutes, and I couldn't tell you what I was doing there or how I got there. Kirk, I got scared. I think you might have been right about me needing help." The silence on his end lasted 2 full seconds. Then his voice came back, warm and certain and moving very fast. "Dad, come back over tonight. Dina and I have the guest room set up. You shouldn't be alone right now." We'll take care of everything, you don't have to worry about any of it anymore. I told him I needed to rest first, that I'd think about it. After I hung up, I set Dell's second phone on the kitchen counter with the speaker on, connected to a call Dell was listening to from his workshop 6 miles away. 20 minutes later, from the other room, I heard Kirk call Dina. I heard her voice carry back through the hallway, the way voices do in a house where the walls know your patterns. "He's breaking," she said. Her voice had a brightness to it that made my stomach turn. "Kirk, he actually called you. Did you hear how he sounded? Call Hartwell tonight. Tell him the guardianship application goes in Monday. And make sure he confirms the finder's fee clears before we file. I want that in writing before we do anything else." Dell recorded every word. I did not go to Kirk's house that night. I drove instead to Perry's office, and we sat at his conference table until past midnight going through everything. The camera recordings, Dell's audio, the Hartwell development connection, the rezoning documents, Kirk's financial arrangement with the group. Perry made a list in his careful handwriting. He called his colleague Margot, a litigation attorney who had built her practice on elder financial abuse cases. She answered on the third ring. "Bring him in at 8, she said. "I'll have coffee ready." I wore my work clothes to Margot's office. Canvas pants, old flannel shirt with the paint stain on the left cuff from a job 3 summers ago, steel-toed boots that had walked across 100 sites. I looked exactly like what they had decided I was. The rumpled, undone old man who had lost his wife and his bearings, and needed someone else to take the wheel. Kirk and Dina were already in the conference room when I arrived. Kirk had on a sport coat. Dina wore a blazer. They had dressed like people who expected to sign something significant and wanted to look appropriate for it. Kirk stood when I walked in. He put his hand on my shoulder with that warm, proprietary pressure, the kind of grip that communicates ownership dressed up as care. "Dad, I know this is hard, but we're going to get things sorted out for you. You're going to feel so much better once this is settled." "I appreciate you both being here," I said. I took my seat. Margot was already at the head of the table. She had the stillness of someone who had been in this room many times before and understood exactly how it would go. She slid a bound document across the table toward Kirk. He reached for it the way a man reaches for something he has been waiting for. He pulled it close, flipped the cover open, scanned the first lines, and I watched his face do the thing I had driven across town in my work boots to see. The warmth went first, then the color, then the certainty like a light switched off at the breaker. "This isn't a," he stopped, started again. "This is a civil complaint." "Filed this morning," Margot said. Her voice was level as a finished floor. "Plaintiff is your father. Defendants are you and your wife. The complaint covers elder financial abuse, unauthorized installation of surveillance devices in the plaintiff's residence, conspiracy to defraud through fraudulent guardianship proceedings, and breach of fiduciary duty." Kirk looked at me. I did not look away. "There's also," Margot said, drawing a second page from the folder, "the matter of a documented finder's fee arrangement with Hartwell Development Group. $185,000, contingent on successful transfer of your father's property following the guardianship petition." Dina went still. The kind of still that happens when something that has been moving very fast suddenly stops. She turned to look at Kirk. I watched her face reorganize itself, watched the expression she had walked in with dissolve into something colder and far more present. $185,000, she said. Her voice was quiet. "Kirk, you told me the referral fee was a few $1,000s. You said it was standard. You said..." "Dina, you told me the property was worth $600,000. She put her hands flat on the table. Her voice had gone from quiet to something else entirely, the particular tone of a person doing fast arithmetic and not liking the answer. "How much is it actually worth?" Margot looked at me. I nodded. "Based on confirmed appraisals and comparable transactions in the rezoned corridor," Margot said, "between $7.2 and $8.8 million. Dina stood up. She walked to the window. She stood with her back to the table and looked at the parking structure across the street and did not speak again for a very long time. Kirk looked at me. The sport coat had gone wrong on his shoulders, the collar pushed at an angle, and he looked young in a way that made me tired rather than tender. "Dad," he said, His voice had dropped to something almost private. I want you to know I do worry about you. That part is real. You've been— I know what I've been, I said. He stopped. I have been standing in rooms not knowing why I walked in. I have been forgetting to eat and pour coffee I don't drink. I have been sitting on your mother's side of the bed at 2 in the morning because I cannot make the room feel less empty. I looked at him. That is what grief looks like, Kirk. Not incompetence. Grief. He did not answer. You put cameras in my house, I said. 4 of them. In the lamp you brought me as a gift. In the smoke detector in my hallway. Behind your mother's plate in the kitchen. You filmed me sleeping. You filmed me crying. You were going to take that footage into a courtroom and tell a judge that the man your mother loved for 40 years could no longer be trusted to manage his own life. And you were going to collect $185,000 from the company waiting to buy his land. The ventilation in the ceiling was the only sound. I built this family, I said, the same way I built every house I ever put up, one nail at a time, for 40 years. I did not raise my voice. I did not have to. I had learned a long time ago that the quietest thing in a room is usually the one that carries the farthest. Kirk put his face in his hands. Margot was not soft, but she was precise. She laid out 2 options and gave them time to understand both. The first path led to the district attorney's office, to criminal charges that carried real sentences, to Kirk's arrangement with Hartwell becoming public record, and the guardianship scheme unraveling in open court. The second required a signed written confession, permanent financial restitution, and the removal of every camera from my home, documented and verified. They signed. Dina separately, with a statement distinguishing her knowledge of the finder's fee from her husband's, a distinction Margot had anticipated and the law recognized. They left without speaking to me. I sat at the conference table after they were gone. Dell was waiting in the lobby downstairs. I knew that, and it helped. I did not sell the land to Hartwell Development. Their representative called 4 times. The offers got larger each time. I declined each one the same way, politely and without explanation. Instead, I contacted the hospital group directly. Not the developers, the physicians and administrators who actually intended to build something on that land and use it to help people. We talked for several weeks. I asked them about their plans and their patients and what kind of care they intended to provide, and eventually I gave them a counterproposal. I would not sell. I would grant a permanent use easement on 1 acre, enough to anchor their main building, in exchange for 2 conditions. First, the half-acre along the east fence line where Lucille's hydrangeas grew would be designated permanent protected green space. No structure could be built over it, ever. Second, the hospital's grief counseling center, which they had planned to name after a major donor, would instead be named the Lucille Mead Room, free to families of terminal patients. No copays, no insurance requirements, free. They agreed. I believe they agreed partly because they needed to, and partly because the hospital's director of patient services had lost her own mother the previous year and understood, past the contract language, exactly what she was agreeing to. I tore the old house down. I want to be clear, this is not a metaphor. I hired a crew and I stood on the perimeter in my hard hat and watched it happen. The house had stopped being a home when I found those cameras. I could not get that back. But the land was not the house. The land was still Lucille's. On the back portion of the property, where we had always talked about building a smaller place once Kirk was grown, and we no longer needed all that room, I built a cottage. 3 rooms, everything level and square, done right. I framed as much of it as my back would allow, which was not everywhere but was enough. I set the front door myself. Lucille had picked out the hardware 10 years ago during a renovation we never got around to. She'd kept the catalog page folded in her desk drawer, and I found it after she died, and I had been waiting for the right door to put it on. Kirk and I have not spoken since the morning at Margot's office. I do not know yet if that changes. Some things break so cleanly you can hear it happen. Other things you leave open, like a window in early spring, not forcing anything, just seeing what air comes in. What I know is that Lucille used to say the most dangerous thing you can do to a person is decide you already understand them. She said it about her hospice patients. She said it about me, sometimes, when I thought I had her figured out and she reminded me I did not. She said it was the root of every real harm she had ever seen one person do to another. Not malice exactly, but the certainty that you have already taken the full measure of someone and found them smaller than they are. They decided my grief had made me manageable, that losing her had left me soft enough to steer. What they did not understand, and what you cannot explain to someone who has not loved and lost the way that wears you down to something essential, is that grief does not dull a person. Grief clarifies. It burns away everything decorative until all that remains is what is actually true. I am sitting on the back porch of the cottage right now. It is early morning, cold and clear, the kind of morning Lucille would have called perfect coffee weather, the kind where the air has a quality to it that feels deliberate. The hospital's steel frame is rising 3 lots to the west. I can see it from here if I turn my head. And along the east fence line, right where I can see them from my chair without having to move, her hydrangeas are coming back. Every one of them. I did nothing to protect them through the winter. I just left them alone. They came back on their own. She planted those herself. Every spring for 30 years, on her knees in the dirt, talking to them like they could hear her. Maybe they could. Some things are not for sale. That is not confusion. That is the only thing I am absolutely certain of.